example. When you go to the trade shows in the machine vision industry, it was like the ceiling height was like this, right? Anyone ever see Being John Malkovich? Maybe this joke's too dated too. Okay, it was like the 7.5 floor of Being John Malkovich, right? And when you go to trade shows and the ceiling heights are low, that's your potential in the industry, right? And I promise you there was something to that. Maybe correlation's not perfect, but there's something to that. We ultimately made a pivot where the ceiling heights were really high, and honestly, went to the first trade show and we were like, wow, look at that. There are high ceilings here. I wonder what that means, right? And the metaphor, I think, is perfect, right? High ceilings, there's money. The machine vision, it would be, all the conferences would be at second-tier hotels in like the worst convention room they had. And the market we went into was at the Javits Center, the Moscone Center, the McCormick Place, like these major convention centers. Honestly, there is correlation here, so pay attention to that. So ultimately, machine vision was a forest of niches. It is a tough industry. It's not even an industry. It's a set of technologies going after many industries. And it was very unclear whose problem we were solving, which really made it difficult to think about how to build a business. And we had a lot of VCs interested. We'd go into meeting 5, 6, 7 before they'd realize this. So we got a lot of false signal from VCs, and then we get a lot of, at the end they'd say, it's really unclear what business you're building and how you build it. And we wanted to find a large potential beachhead, go direct with a product, a full solution to the customer, solve a large pain. So we went to an industry that I never wanted to be in. So here's the problem statement. 15 million dental impressions are done a year in the United States. The process is antiquated, it is costly. There's about 200 million done in the developed world. It's uncomfortable for patients. Has anyone had a dental impression? Okay, so here's what happens. I'm not as young as you guys, but we're on the younger side. When you get into your 50s, you start having these things all the time. And the biggest use case is crowns. In the United States alone, there are about 40 to 50 million crowns done a year. It is the ultimate cottage industry where everything is a single unit of production. It starts with this dental impression, which is this totally inaccurate, very unpleasant. I won't ask if anyone puked, but a lot of people puked from them. And so that was an interesting place to look with 3D imaging, and that became our market. Prompt-based technologies, impression-free dentistry. And you can see it's so much more focused than the world isn't flat. And I often get the question, wouldn't you have been better off like creating just generalized 3D imaging and people would have done things with it? I don't think it almost ever works that way. I think you've got to go to a market. You can't wait for markets to come to you. There's too much stuff to build, and it's too hard to product manage anything when you don't know exactly who your customer is. So you got to find a single beachhead for almost any business, and you have to go, but it's got to be a big one, right? So look for a big single beachhead. So we went into a market, by the way, I'm like squeamish of blood. Medical stuff doesn't agree with me. If you started off by saying, here, do you want to start a dental company? I would have said, no way, not even a little bit of interest. By the time we got here, I was so excited because we actually found a market, right? And it's one of the things you actually learn is when you get deep on anything and you believe you can make a huge impact, it starts to get really exciting because we believe we can change the way this industry works. So I think one of the interesting takeaways also is students, MBAs like I was, or undergrads, we tend to go into markets that we have the most experience with, like everyone wants to start a tutoring company or a dating company or a food company, and that's okay because you're more likely to have seen the challenge or the problem that you want to solve because you've been in that industry. But there are all kinds of fascinating things that there aren't a million people rushing after that when you get really deep on them gets really, really interesting, right? So here, this is where we went. The subline was AKA No More Guck. Okay, so here's lesson 2. So lesson 1 was keep building. Lesson 2 is leverage your network of trust. Okay, I actually think it's a really hard thing for people to do, and it was for me. But here's the lesson. If you know people who would support you, right, and those that you think should support you, and those people don't invest in your, or won't invest in your company, or you don't ask them to invest in your company, why will those who don't know you do it? Right? I mean, at the end of the day, at the very early stage of a startup, it isn't so much about an idea. Ideas, think of them as like a vessel. They're a cup. They're like you want to put a good wrapper around it, and the idea is that wrapper. But it's not about the idea. There's this huge myth about ideas in startups, like you have an idea and you get rich. It's the dumbest, most absurd thing that goes on in entrepreneurship, right? If you've been learning about customer development, you realize that the idea is like a place to point, right, and start doing the real work, which is customer development, right? But at the early stages, when you haven't proven much about your market, your customers, you've never started a company before, you've never been venture-backed before, and you're not getting the benefit of the doubt, your best currency is people who know you really well. Who have you worked for who thinks you're awesome? Do you have a family member who thinks you're awesome? Do you have a wealthy friend who thinks you're tremendous? Like, those people who believe in you, they're worth their weight in gold, and I would say most startups never get off the ground without those people. So this is David Frankel. David was an MBA classmate of mine. You had been a successful entrepreneur before business school. Not everybody's as lucky enough to get to know David at the stage I did. He came to school after starting a very successful startup called the Internet Solution. David's one of the really true first super angel investors. He was writing meaningful checks to entrepreneurs and putting them in business around 2003, like Peter Thiel was. He put a lot of us in business. David committed $500,000 to Bronte's Technologies before anyone else. It took me 6 months to accept. So David offered me his money in May, right after we were in the competition, right around graduation. And I didn't want to lose David's money. He was my friend. I wanted arm's length money. My whole theory was, we should be able to go get money from somebody else. I shouldn't be at risk of losing my friend's money. And Dave had the right mentality. He said, look, I'm a big boy. I can afford to lose the money. I wouldn't offer it to you otherwise. And I believe your human capital is worth way more than my financial capital. And even if you talk to somebody who doesn't necessarily have that thought, you may need to broach that with them, right? You may need to say to them, look, I'm only going to take your money if you're comfortable with the idea that my human capital is worth more than your financial capital. So if we fail, I've lost more than you have. And if you don't feel that way, I actually don't want your money, right? Because you're putting yourself 100% on the line. Dave had a diversified portfolio, right? So I was putting myself out there way more than he was, but it took me a very long time to get comfortable with that. Today, David's my partner in Founder Collective. We founded Founder Collective together. So there's a great story actually, because David funded a bunch of us that actually got involved in Founder Collective together. It was actually out of his investment activities with us, and then actually all of us combined, that Founder Collective was born. But he put Bronte's in business. Without him, we would not have gotten into business. So you definitely, for many, many companies like ours, you've got to go find somebody who believes in you ahead of specifically diligencing the opportunity or things like that. Okay, so here's the last one. That's Al Gore, in case anyone doesn't remember him. Number 3 here is sign up experts related to your business. Al Gore became something of an expert in the energy space. But here's the idea, which is, if you're doing something innovative, successful entrepreneurs or people who are experts in the space you're going after should understand it way more than any venture investor ever would, right? And if those people, they know more about it than the VC space, about your space than VCs, that's a little hard to read, but those people can be very powerful symbols to VCs. Like, if you're in energy and Al Gore gets on board with your company, it doesn't have to be Al Gore, it's an extreme example, but it really says something to the venture community about your company, and it makes it clearer that you might be working on something much more special than at first blush somebody who doesn't know your business that well might assume. But by the way, if you're having trouble signing up those types of experts, it's also a very powerful data point for you. Because if you are doing something innovative, and you're good at selling, because you have to be good at selling to be an entrepreneur, you need to be able to get these types of people on board. And if you can't, you probably need somebody in your team who can. Or you probably need to pivot from what you're doing. So you gotta ask yourself, are you the right person to be pitching this business, or are you working on the right business? And if you can't motivate really qualified, successful people in the space that you're going after, there's probably something missing. Here's what we did. This is Kelsey Worth. Kelsey Worth, does anyone know what Invisalign is? Invisalign? So Invisalign, Kelsey Worth had founded out of Stanford in 2007. She had been an MBA at Stanford. In 5 years, it was a public company worth over $1 billion. Today, it's worth something like $3 billion. She was in our industry doing mass customization in dentistry on the output side. We were doing mass customization on the input side. She had been an MBA graduate who started a business right out of MBA. Kelsey was a perfect trailblazer of the path we were trying to go on, right? This is Bruce Donoff. He's the Dean of Harvard School of Dental Medicine. I have a great story about Bruce. Maybe I'm gonna run out of time. Maybe I won't tell that story. Anyway, I'll tell the story for 1 second. So we emailed the head of the prosthodontics department at Harvard Dental School saying, look, we're just graduated from Harvard, we're working on this business in dentistry, we'd love to meet with you. And he said, come in tomorrow. And we were like, wow, that's really cool that he wants to meet with us. We get to the meeting, there were 2 guys there. And the tall guy introduces himself as H.P. Weber, the guy we had set the meeting with. And the shorter guy says, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Bruce Donoff. I'm the Dean of Harvard School of Dental Medicine. And what you're doing is going to change our industry, and Harvard needs to be a part of it. Experts in your space will understand what you're doing if it's important, right? And that was game-changing for us. We hadn't even committed to going after the space yet. We weren't even doing this business, but he was so committed, he crashed the meeting. This is Mike Gerard. He had introduced one of the leading technologies in the industry. This is Gerard Moufflet, who was probably the leading investor in the dental industry. And this is Ping Fu, the founder of Geomagic. Has anyone read her book, Bend Not Break? Nobody read it? It was a bestseller last year, very controversial. It's a great book. But she's one of the leading technologists in the 3D space. She now works for 3D Systems, which is one of the largest 3D printing companies. They bought her company last year. Here's what we did. So ideally, the best thing you could do is get them as a team member. I would have made Kelsey CEO of our company in a heartbeat if she would have taken the job. That's what I think of her, that's what I thought it would have meant for our company. To me, Kelsey running a company was more credible and valuable than me, and I would have done that because I wanted to be a success. She wasn't interested, unfortunately. Secondly, an investor board member, that's a pretty big commitment. If somebody's gonna write a check, become a board member, that's pretty meaningful. And then the last, still valuable but not quite as much, is to have somebody become an advisor to your company. It's gotta be meaningful. Window dressing is not valuable. If you put somebody down as an advisor and then they won't take investor calls or industry calls for you, it's kind of meaningless, and that becomes pretty obvious. But if they're really advising the company and they're involved and they'll get involved, that can be pretty meaningful. So here's what we did. Kelsey became an investor and a board member. Bruce Donoff became an advisor. Mike Gerard became our VP of marketing. Gerard Moufflet became an investor and board member. And Ping Fu became an advisor. So we went from two guys who had no credibility in the dental industry, with people asking questions like, which one of you guys are going to go to dental school, to this roster of people saying this was important and would change our industry. We were totally in a different place, right? It went from not credible to incredibly credible because we were able to do this work. So think of this as part of the development of your company is getting the right people around it and continuing to do that over time. Relationship does, though, need to be extremely genuine. If it's not, it has no value. So the good news, in 2004, midway through the year, we got investment from what today is Flybridge Capital, Bain Capital Ventures, and Charles River Ventures. This was the happy article, somewhat replacing the really negative one that the same paper had put out earlier in the year, or the year before. Here's what we created. It's called the Lava Chairside Oral Scanner. It's a 3D imaging tool, scans the mouth, replaces dental impression. It actually builds a model in real time. So it captures 120 3D data sets per second, combines them together, and creates an exceptional model of that data. And the device actually is really exciting, but a lot of the premise was accuracy. When we first, right after the 3M acquisition, we were not where we needed to be at on accuracy. We hadn't introduced the product to the market, and the industry standard is about a 5% replacement rate. And that's one of the measures of accuracy in the market. We were at a 50% replacement rate at that stage, so it was pretty scary, and 3M actually got very nervous. By the end of that year, we were at a 0.5% replacement rate. So we were 10 times as accurate as the industry standard at that point. So it's a pretty big deal. Here's some more images of it. It looks like an oversized Sonicare toothbrush. The model you see up here is literally what gets built as you're scanning. It's a very unusual technology. It literally is capturing 3D data in motion, in video. You can see, if you're interested, you can go on YouTube and learn more about it. Computer vision technology. We became very advanced in 3D printing. It was a part of our business we didn't even anticipate at the beginning, but it became critical because the labs weren't sophisticated enough to go directly to milling. So we had to really push the envelope in 3D printing, which I'm very thankful of, not just because it worked out here, but because it's part of the reason I became an investor in MakerBot, which had a great exit this year, and I don't think that would have happened if I hadn't actually learned a lot about that industry. Here's what's really cool is, I'll tell you one quick story here, is in 2008, at the end of the year, I left the company. 3M bought us in 2006. It was a very good return for everyone involved, including our investors. We sold the company for about $100 million. In 2008, at the end of the year, I left the company. I thought I left it in very good hands, but a lot of challenges in integration between 3M and Brontes were still unresolved. And in 2010, they called me up to tell me they were shutting down the Lexington site, moving everything to St. Paul, and that they'd be coming out with a new version at some point. Our guys transitioned that. They turned over their vision for a new version of the system, and then we basically heard nothing. Product wasn't developed. Like, we just didn't hear anything. The product was languishing in the market. They weren't actively selling it anymore. It looked like they gave up. It was very depressing. Everyone was upset about it. And about 2 years after they shut down the site, in 2012, October 2012, they introduced the new version, which is almost exactly what our guys turned over to them, which is exceptional. They did an amazing job. Now it's called the 3M True Definition Scanner. But it absolutely looks like a dental handpiece. It's tiny, it's very small in the patient's mouth. It's absolutely beautiful technology, and they brought their price down by more than half, which is exciting as well. So anyway, some takeaways here. What can you do? Keep building, pivot if necessary, but you gotta keep building, build traction, prove to people what they might not yet be ready to embrace. Leverage your network of trust. Sign up experts related to your business. Nearly every first-time entrepreneur has a crazy roller coaster ride. You're not alone. Don't let it get to you. Be prepared for that. You should expect it. Instagram is a very unusual exception. It doesn't usually go that way. And then remember that this whole talk's about raising money. Raising money is not building a company. It's literally putting gas in a tank. You still got to go drive a car somewhere, or if you stick to my original analogy, you need to fly a rocket ship. And that is way harder than raising money. But that wasn't the focus of this talk, so we'll go off that topic. But sometimes I almost think there's too much emphasis on the fundraising side, which I'm now contributing to, instead of focusing on the big picture, which is building a great company is really, really hard. But I'd also add, there are very few things that are more worthwhile. There's a great study that Harvard Business School did on satisfaction of their alumni 20 years out. And I think it was more, I think it was a huge cohort across many different years. And off the charts, the happiest people in life satisfaction were the entrepreneurs. Off the charts, right? And not just the entrepreneurs who had big successes, the entrepreneurs who didn't have big successes, but just, sort of the excitement of creating. I think if you do this stuff to make money, usually you will give up pretty quickly because you're gonna have many moments where you won't think you're gonna make money for a lot of good reasons. Most companies fail. But if you do this because you want to create great things that make an impact on the world, which you don't get to do in finance, and you don't get to do in consulting, and generally speaking, you don't really get to do with big companies, that's a great reason to do this stuff. And that's what will keep you motivated through the periods that it looks like you're going to go out of business and lose everything you have. Those are really the big drivers of motivation. So anyway, this was the announcement. Today we announced to our team the sale of Brontes to 3M. It's a pretty exciting day. Anyway, so that's the background of that, and it's really been a pleasure to tell you that story and talk to you guys about how to get started on financing. I'm happy to take questions if there's time for that. Okay, so no audience questions, just afterwards? Okay, so I'm here for a little bit, happy to stick around and chat, so come on up, and thanks guys for sticking around and making time.